I came home after a 12-hour shift smelling like burnt wire insulation, sweat, and stale gas station coffee, and found a champagne-colored Range Rover parked inside my garage like it paid the mortgage. Not halfway inside either, not awkwardly tucked near the wall, dead center, like whoever parked it wanted me to know exactly who was in control. Then 30 seconds later, the president of our HOA fined me $150 for leaving my garage door open too long while I stared at her car sitting where my daughter's treehouse lumber used to be. That should have been the moment I lost my temper. Honestly, most people probably would have. But looking back now, that moment right there was the beginning of the end for Vanessa Holloway. And 6 weeks later, while she was crying in front of a federal investigator outside her $1 million house, half the neighborhood stood on the sidewalk pretending not to watch. My name's Caleb Turner. I'm 36. I've been an electrician most of my adult life. And until all this happened, I genuinely believed moving into Cedar Ridge Estates was the smartest thing I'd ever done. The place looked perfect from the outside. Clean sidewalks, decent schools, families grilling on weekends, kids riding bikes without parents panicking every 5 seconds. After my divorce, I needed stability more than anything. My daughter Lucy was 9 then, old enough to notice when life felt shaky, and I wanted one place that felt solid for her. So I worked overtime for 3 straight years, took every emergency call nobody else wanted, crawled through attics in July heat that felt like breathing through soup. Also, I could finally buy a modest 3-bedroom house with a garage big enough for a workshop. That garage mattered to me more than the house itself, honestly. My grandfather's old workbench sat against the back wall, stained dark from decades of grease and sawdust, and every Sunday Lucy and I built little projects together back there. Birdhouses, shelves, once even a crooked little lemonade stand she painted bright blue because she said boring colors made people sad. That garage was the only place in my life that still felt uncomplicated. Then Vanessa Holloway decided it belonged to her. You ever meet someone who smiles like they're doing charity work every time they acknowledge your existence? That was Vanessa. Mid-50s maybe, always dressed like she was heading to a luxury realtor photo shoot. Blonde hair sprayed into place so perfectly it probably survived hurricanes. She lived in the giant stone house near the subdivision entrance with her husband Grant, who worked for county zoning and carried himself like every conversation was secretly being recorded for a courtroom documentary. Vanessa ran the HOA the way medieval kings probably ran villages, smiling while she burned people alive. At first it was little things. She cited a retired mechanic because his pickup truck had faded paint. Sent warning letters to an elderly widow because her wind chimes were emotionally disruptive to neighborhood tranquility. Nobody even knew what the hell that meant. One family got fined because their teenage son parked on the street during Christmas break. She treated bylaws like scripture and herself like the prophet delivering them from heaven. Most people just stayed quiet because fighting HOA people feels exhausting before it even starts. Me included, honestly. I kept my grass trimmed, kept my head down, parked my work van off-site just so she wouldn't start drama. But Vanessa had this way of targeting people she thought wouldn't fight back. Working-class people, older residents, single parents. Looking back now, I realize she studied weakness the same way some people study weather reports. The first real interaction we had happened when I helped my neighbor Mrs. Alvarez install motion lights after someone broke into her shed. Vanessa appeared out of nowhere in heels sharp enough to stab concrete. "Do you have authorization for electrical modifications?" she asked, clutching her clipboard against her chest like she was arresting me. I told her I was licensed. Even offered to show her my certification. She smiled that cold little smile and said, "Well, some of us value proper community procedures. Some of us." Funny how people like her always talked like they represented civilization itself. I remember driving Lucy to school the next morning and she asked me why the fancy lady always looks angry even when she's smiling. Kids notice things adults pretend not to. Then came that Tuesday. I'd spent all day wiring backup generators at a pediatric clinic across town. My knees felt like broken glass, and all I wanted was a shower and maybe 2 hours where nobody needed something from me. Instead, I hit the garage remote. and the door rolled up to reveal Vanessa's Range Rover sitting there under my lights like a showroom display. For a second, I honestly thought I'd opened the wrong garage somehow. My toolbox had been shoved against the wall. Lumber for Lucy's treehouse stacked crooked near the freezer. And sitting on my patio chair out front, legs crossed, sipping iced tea like she owned the property, was Vanessa Holloway. "Oh, good," she said when she saw me, calm as church on Sunday. "You're home. We need to discuss community cooperation." I remember standing there in my driveway, still holding my lunch cooler, staring at Vanessa like my brain simply refused to process what I was seeing. She took another sip of iced tea and motioned toward the garage behind me like we were discussing patio furniture placement instead of the fact she'd illegally occupied my property. "My driveway is being resurfaced tomorrow," she said. "Temporary HOA accommodation procedures allow me to use available resident spaces during infrastructure maintenance." I blinked at her. "What procedures?" "Community procedures, Caleb." "No." "What procedures specifically?" That tiny smile on her face twitched for half a second. "You really should read your bylaws more carefully." Now maybe this says something about years of electrical work rewiring my brain, but when things get dangerous around high voltage, panicking gets you killed. Calm keeps you alive. So instead of yelling, I pulled out my phone and started recording. The change in her expression was immediate. It was like watching a curtain slip. "You cannot record me." "Actually, I can," I said. "We're standing on my property. Turn that off. Soon as your car leaves my garage." Her voice sharpened instantly. "You're being incredibly aggressive right now." Funny thing about manipulative people, the second they realize they're losing control, they suddenly become the victim. She stood up so fast the ice cubes rattled in her glass. "I was attempting to help the community function smoothly, and you're making this unnecessarily hostile." Hostile as parking inside somebody's garage without asking. "You have extra space." That's not how ownership works. She stepped closer then, lowering her voice like she was offering me some private business opportunity. "Caleb, people who cooperate with the HOA tend to have much easier lives here." There it was. Not even hidden anymore. Just a threat wrapped in suburban politeness. I laughed a little, couldn't help it honestly, because something about hearing a woman wearing pearl earrings threaten my livelihood over garage space felt ridiculous and terrifying at the same time. "Move the car," I told her. Her smile disappeared completely. "Tomorrow morning." Then she walked away like the conversation was over. The next morning I opened my front door and found a bright orange violation notice taped to the glass. Community visual disturbance. Garage left open overnight. Fine, $150. Escalates to $500 after 48 hours. And scribbled underneath in blue ink. Cooperation prevents conflict. VH. I actually stood there laughing in disbelief. Not happy laughter either. The kind where you realize someone genuinely thinks they can do anything they want if they say it confidently enough. I called my friend Nate during lunch. Nate and I went to high school together before he became a real estate attorney with the personality of a tired pit bull. He listened quietly while I explained everything, then let out this long whistle. "Caleb, yeah. She's either incredibly stupid or incredibly confident nobody's ever challenged her before. Probably both. Start documenting everything." "Already am." "Good. Also go pull HOA and corporation records from a county office." "Why?" There was a pause. "Because people like this usually get sloppy when they think power belongs to them permanently." That Friday, I took an early lunch and drove downtown to the county records building. The place smelled like old paper, dust, and burnt coffee. Like every government building in America somehow shares the exact same air freshener. I spent almost 3 hours digging through property filings until an older clerk named Denise wandered over and asked what I was looking for. When I explained the situation, her eyebrows climbed halfway up her forehead. "Honey," she muttered, scrolling through survey documents, "your HOA's using outdated plat maps." "What does that mean?" She pointed at the screen. "It means your property line extends nearly 2 feet farther east than their records show." "Wait, your entire garage is fully within your deeded property boundary. Not shared access. Not community adjacent. Fully yours." I stared at the screen while this weird, slow realization settled into my chest. Vanessa knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't HOA misunderstanding. This was intentional. And somehow, that pissed me off more than the actual trespassing. Because suddenly every story from every neighbor started making sense. Mrs. Alvarez getting harassed over lighting. Mr. Delaney getting threatened over his work trailer. Vanessa wasn't enforcing rules. She was testing who would submit. That same evening, Lucy came over for the weekend carrying a backpack bigger than her torso and immediately asked if we could work on the treehouse. Soon, I told her, Daddy's handling something first. She noticed the Range Rover the second we opened the garage. Why is that lady's car in our house? Kids really do phrase things perfectly sometimes. Because she forgot how manners work. Lucy stared at the SUV for a second, then whispered, "She seems mean rich." Mean rich. Man, I almost spit out my drink laughing. Saturday morning things escalated again. I walked into the garage and found another car parked beside the Range Rover. Black Mercedes. Tinted windows. My tool cabinet shoved against the wall. And hanging from the handles, a brand new padlock that absolutely did not belong to me. For a second, I just stood there hearing blood pound in my ears. Every tool I owned, 20 years of work, locked behind somebody else's chain inside my own garage. Then I spotted the sticky note. Temporary staging setup. Community cooperation appreciated. VH. I don't mind admitting this. I almost lost control right there. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely breathe. Lucy was inside eating cereal while I stood in that garage trying to decide whether adulthood was worth preserving. Then something my grandfather used to say popped into my head. Never destroy evidence when idiots are busy creating it for you. So instead of grabbing bolt cutters, I called the police. Officer Raymond Brooks showed up about 20 minutes later. Big guy, calm voice, looked exhausted in the way only cops dealing with suburban nonsense can look exhausted. He listened quietly while I explained everything, then walked around the garage taking pictures. "These your locks?" he asked. "Nope." "You give permission for either vehicle to be here?" "Nope." He nodded slowly. "Okay, that's a problem." Vanessa arrived halfway through the conversation wearing sunglasses large enough to hide half her face. "Officer," she said immediately, "this is an HOA operational misunderstanding." Brooks glanced at her, unimpressed. "Ma'am, did you place a lock on this resident's property?" "Temporary access control during community maintenance." "That's not what I asked." Her jaw tightened. "The HOA has authority regarding shared. This isn't shared property," I interrupted, handing Brooks the updated county survey printout. He studied the papers for about 10 seconds before looking back at Vanessa. "Ma'am, property deed overrides HOA interpretation every single time." The silence after that felt incredible. Vanessa's face lost color little by little while traffic drifted past outside, and somebody down the street started mowing their lawn like normal life hadn't just paused completely. Then Brooks hit her with the line that changed everything. "Honestly, this is starting to look less like an HOA dispute and more like unlawful occupation of private property. You know those moments where somebody finally says out loud the exact thing you've been feeling for weeks? That, right there." Vanessa recovered quickly though. People like her always do. She smiled again, but this time it looked strained around the edges. "Well," she said softly, "I'm sure we can all avoid unnecessary legal complications if everyone remains reasonable." Brooks stared at her for a long second. "Move the vehicles today, ma'am." Then he handed me his card quietly while Vanessa wasn't looking. "Document everything," he muttered. "Something about this situation feels bigger than parking." And the crazy part? He was right. None of us understood yet just how much bigger it really was. Monday night, the HOA held what Vanessa called an emergency compliance meeting inside the cafeteria of Cedar Ridge Elementary, which honestly should have been my first clue the woman was spiraling. There were maybe 30 residents there, folding chairs squeaking against the floor, stale cafeteria smell hanging in the air, parents whispering to each other like we were about to witness either a public execution or a magic trick. Vanessa stood at the front beside her husband Grant wearing this navy blazer that looked expensive enough to pay my electric bill for 6 months. And for the first 20 minutes, she acted completely normal. That was the scary part. Calm, polite, smiling, like she genuinely believed she still controlled the room. Then she started talking about unauthorized hostility toward HOA leadership and certain residents undermining community stability. Translation me. She never said my name directly at first. People like Vanessa preferred poison served indirectly. When individuals refuse cooperation, she said, pacing slowly near the projector screen, the integrity of the neighborhood suffers for everyone. I remember hearing somebody behind me whisper, "Oh boy." Then Vanessa clicked the remote, and my house appeared on the projector. Photos of my garage, my driveway, Lucy's unfinished treehouse lumber stacked beside the wall. She'd been photographing my property for weeks. This, Vanessa announced proudly, is exactly the type of escalating noncompliance threatening property values. That was the moment something shifted in the room. Because it's one thing hearing HOA complaints and emails. It's another thing watching a grown woman publicly display pictures of another man's house like she's building a criminal case. Mrs. Alvarez stood up first. Tiny woman, maybe 65, sweetest person on earth. "You photographed my backyard too," she said quietly. Vanessa froze. Mrs. Alvarez kept going. 3 times. Then Mr. Delaney stood up near the back wall. "Mine too." Another voice followed. Then another. Suddenly the whole room started talking at once, stories spilling everywhere. Warning letters, threats, surprise finds. Vanessa's smile started cracking around the edges while Grant sat beside her looking like a man slowly realizing his parachute might actually be a backpack full of bricks. That's when I stood up. I still remember how loud the chairs sounded scraping the cafeteria floor. "You want to show everybody something?" I said. "Let's show them everything." And I walked straight to the front carrying the county records folder under my arm. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. Not anger this time. Fear. Real fear. I handed copies of the updated property survey to half the front row while people leaned forward trying to understand what was happening. My garage was never HOA access property, I explained calmly. Not even close. Then I showed the police incident report. Then the photos of her locks on my tool cabinet. Then the recordings. You could actually hear the room breathing differently after that. Quiet, tense, the way theaters sound right before a movie reaches the part everybody remembers afterward. Grant finally grabbed the microphone. "This meeting is over." But nobody moved. Vanessa stepped toward me then, voice low enough only I could hear. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." And man, looking back now, that sentence still gives me chills. Because 3 days later the FBI showed up. Not local police. Not county investigators. Federal agents. Apparently Officer Brooks had forwarded the incident reports after noticing similarities between Vanessa's behavior and complaints connected to multiple HOA disputes across neighboring counties. Turns out Vanessa and Grant weren't just power-hungry suburban control freaks. They were part of a much bigger scam. Federal investigators discovered they'd been using HOA pressure campaigns to push homeowners into selling properties below market value. Older residents, divorced parents, working-class families, anyone they thought lacked money to fight back legally. Grant would get advanced zoning information through county connections. Vanessa would make life miserable until people cracked and sold cheap. Then investors connected to their real estate group would swoop in before development projects raised prices. It had been happening for years. My garage was never about parking. My property sat near a future commercial expansion zone they already knew about. They wanted me stressed, isolated, financially cornered, just another exhausted single dad willing to sell and disappear quietly. Instead, everything exploded. News vans parked outside Cedar Ridge for almost a week. Vanessa's Range Rover got hauled out of my garage on a flatbed while reporters filmed from the sidewalk. Grant resigned 2 days before federal fraud charges dropped publicly. And Vanessa, God, I'll never forget seeing her standing outside her house screaming at investigators while neighbors watched through curtains pretending they weren't watching. But the strangest part came afterward. A month later, Lucy and I finally finished the treehouse. We built it together every weekend, painted the walls soft blue, hung little string lights around the windows, even added a tiny wooden sign over the entrance that read "No mean people allowed." One evening we sat up there eating takeout burgers while the sun dropped behind the subdivision, and Lucy asked me something I still think about sometimes. "Daddy, were you scared?" I looked out across the neighborhood for a while before answering. "Yeah," I admitted. "A lot." "Then why didn't you stop?" Kids ask questions adults spend years avoiding. I remember smiling a little before I answered her. Because sometimes people count on everybody being too tired to fight back. She nodded like that made perfect sense, because somehow to kids, honesty usually does. Vanessa eventually took a plea deal. Grant lost his county position permanently. Several HOA board members across 3 counties got investigated after the story broke publicly. And Cedar Ridge Estates? Weirdly enough, it became a better neighborhood afterward. People actually talked to each other, helped each other. HOA meetings became normal, boring meetings again, instead of little dictatorship rallies. Funny how communities improve once fear leaves the room. But I'll tell you the truth. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that first moment opening my garage door and seeing Vanessa's SUV sitting there like she owned part of my life. Because honestly, she thought she did. And maybe if I'd been a little more exhausted, a little more broke, a little more alone, maybe she would have been right. So now I'm curious, what would you have done? Would you have fought back? Or would you have sold the house and walked away from the fight completely? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I promise you, this kind of thing happens in more neighborhoods than people realize. And if you enjoyed the story, hit subscribe, because next time I'll tell you about the couple who tried to sue a man for feeding stray cats and accidentally exposed something way worse hiding underneath their perfect little neighborhood.